It is early November of 1917, the 4th year of the Great War. Two men call on the Bose family home in Boissevain, Manitoba. Margaret Bose receives the telegram informing her that her son Cliff has been killed in action at Passendale, her third son to die on the Western Front. My name is Marc George. After 25 years in the Canadian Army as an artillery officer, I retired and became the director of the RCA Museum at Canadian Forces Base Shiloh. As a soldier, my principal interest in history is the First World War and its effects on Canada. The Great War remains our nation's most costly conflict, resulting in tragedy for tens of thousands of Canadian families. Although I know it will be a difficult journey, I want to connect with the experiences of the relatives of the fallen. I'm going to meet with a descendant, investigate battlefields, do some hands-on experiments, and follow in the footsteps of a mother searching for the graves of her sons to try and understand how families dealt with the deaths of soldiers in the Great War, to connect with the silver crosses scattered in the wake of their warpaths. I'm in the Boissevain and Morton Cemetery at the Bose family plot. This plot has something in common with several others in this cemetery because there are more names on the tombstone than there are actually people lying in the graves around it. Joe and Margaret Bose grew up in the Meaford district of Ontario, where they were married. They homesteaded in Boissevain in 1890. Soon after that, Joe moved into town and became a grain buyer, and shortly after that, an insurance salesman. Margaret and Joe had 8 children, 2 of whom died as infants. Their eldest daughter, Elma, died of a ruptured appendix at the age of 21. Their oldest boy, Elliot, became a veterinarian. He passed away in August of 1951, about 6 weeks before his mother. The next 3 boys, Cliff, Jim, and Fred, all signed up during the Great War and were all killed. The youngest was Evelyn, who became a nurse, married, and had 1 daughter named Marilyn. I want to try and understand how Margaret could have possibly dealt with the loss of 3 of her sons in the Great War. I'm going to try and follow in her footsteps to connect with her experience, to try and gain some insight into how she dealt with this terrible loss. The most obvious thing is that she inscribed their names on this tombstone, although they're actually lying somewhere in France and Flanders. I've come to Winnipeg to meet Marilyn Griffith, Margaret Bowe's granddaughter. Thank you very much for doing this. I'm hoping she can tell me more about Margaret and her sons.
I don't remember a lot about her. I remember the day she died and women of the community coming over to help my mother because my grandma lived with us. But that's about it. So everything is from the letters and from conversations with other family members.
Okay. And so do you have an impression, though, of her?
My impression is that she was very stoic and that she was very, I believe she really encouraged her sons to go to war. Mm-hmm. She felt it was a civic duty. That's my impression, okay. that she sent them off with her blessings. And she went to Europe after the war? She did. My understanding is that she went twice, and I believe that her, for sure my mom was extremely saddened. Mm-hmm. And so she took my mom, and I'm not sure if she took her on both journeys or not, to have some resolution, I believe.
It is great to see photos of the Bose brothers. And so who's who?
Well, this is, and forgive me, this is Jim, I do believe,
okay.
and Fred and Cliff, I think.
Okay.
But let me please look.
Yeah.
Yeah, James Lawrence is in the middle.
Okay.
Oh, Frederick is on the right, I'm wrong,
Okay.
and Clifford is on the left.
Okay.
So, all in their 20s. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you think about young men in their 20s, doing what they did?
Cliff signed up with the 44th Battalion in August of 1915 and trained at Camp Hughes. The 44th moved to France as part of the 4th Division in August of 1916, but Cliff was ill with sciatica in England and spent 5 months in hospital. As a result, he missed the battles on the Somme and did not join the 44th Battalion in France until December of 1916. He was soon joined by his younger brothers. Jim and Fred both signed up with the 222nd Battalion in Boisevin on January 6, 1916. They trained at Camp Hughes and went to England in the fall. They were back in town a week before they shipped overseas. It was the last time that Margaret saw her boys. From England, Jim and Fred were part of a draft of 295 men sent to reinforce the 44th Battalion on December 28, 1916. They arrived at the 44th Battalion only a few weeks after Cliff, who had signed up 5 months before them. Marilyn shows me a letter written home just after the boys were reunited. So my dear mother, here I am again to tell you that we, Cliff included, are well, and I sincerely hope that this finds you the same. We all have slight colds, but you needn't worry, as they are not unusual here at this time of year, of course, because they're outside in the trenches. Well, Musey, we moved up to the battalion, and I wanted to tell you that Cliff and us had some great talks. Cliff looks fine and is fully as fat as when he first enlisted. I was surprised. All of the boys wrote home to Margaret, so she kept up pretty well with their news. The letters, which generally took a month to reach home, reflected how happy they were to be serving together in the 44th Battalion. On the 15th of March, 1917, Mrs. Bose received the dreaded telegram, telling her that both Fred and Jim had died of wounds. At first she refused to believe it because one digit in Jim's service number was incorrect. But this clerical error was soon corrected, and the grim reality had to be accepted. On the 22nd of March, the Boisevin Recorder headline read, "Boisevin hard hit." Some 500 people attended the memorial service for Fred and Jim at the Methodist Church. In April, Margaret received the letter that Cliff had written to the family on March 1st. He says the boys were hit by a rifle grenade, and that Jim passed away quietly soon after. Cliff's next few letters said that he attended Jim's funeral, and that both James McTaggart from Melita and Fred had also died. He was not able to attend Fred's funeral. Over the next months, her son's personal effects, including the identity discs worn around their necks and their outstanding pay, would have arrived home.
This is Fred's son.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is his dog tag. So it's amazing that you have that.
One assumes this is the watch here that was given to someone for safekeeping.
Marilyn shows me photos of Jim and Fred's graves, taken on 2 separate occasions, so likely on each of Margaret's visits. But it is tempting to think that your grandmother, probably put those flowers out and then took a picture of it, and brought them home. So
yeah.
After Jim had died, Cliff wrote, "My heart is too full to write more at present, but you have most of the particulars, in fact all I know at present. God make it more easy for you to stand this terrible blow, for I expect by now you will have the sad news." It must have been so difficult for Cliff at the front after his brothers died. It's hard to imagine how, bitter you could be toward the opponents, having lost 2 of your brothers to them. So I think, if anything, that probably made Cliff more determined.
Yes, and I just, from my perspective, with our life as it is, and living in Canada, such a free country, I just, I just am so so in awe of what they did and their mindset. My grandmothers who sent them, and their mindset to do this.
Yeah.
And to be so determined. And, you know, who knows what our life would have been like without they and others.
Oh, it's absolutely true. Ed O'Neill was with Fred and Jim when they were hit. He came home to Boissevain in August of 1917, too badly injured for further military service due to a head wound that gave him seizures for the rest of his life. Ed said that the four men had been in an outpost just forward of the trench when they were hit by a single German shell, not a rifle grenade as Cliff had originally thought. I'm on the demolition range at Canadian Forces Base Shiloh to demonstrate the destructive power of artillery. This is an 81mm mortar projectile, normally referred to as a mortar bomb. It weighs 8 pounds and has approximately 4 pounds of high explosive in it. It's a good analogy for most of the types of artillery that could have been fired in the First World War by German field guns and light mortars. I know that James McTaggart and all three of the Bose brothers were killed by artillery fire. So we've arranged for the base ammunition section at Canadian Forces Base Shiloh to execute a controlled detonation of this round to show the effects that a projectile this size can have. This projectile is about 10 times more lethal than a hand grenade. We set up sandbags to protect our cameras and place a mannequin to show the effects of the detonation. Then I have to leave the range area. The ammunition technicians from Canadian Forces Base Shiloh set up the mortar round and fit it with a small explosive charge to cause it to detonate. Then they also withdraw to a safe distance over 600 meters away. You will see the smoke from the detonation in the center of the screen. This camera is in a tower behind a pane of glass over 600 meters away, and it is still shaken by the shock wave from the detonation. At the site, the effects of the detonation are devastating. Slowing down the footage shows the full fury that has been unleashed. 60% of all casualties in the Great War were caused by artillery. This is a rare soldier's eye view of a detonation just on the other side of the sandbags. So the detonation has been executed. You can see that all that remains of the projectile are the fins, and that's because they were encased in sandbags at the time of the controlled detonation. You can see the pattern in the ground and the grass, which shows the scything effect of the fragmentation. You can also see how it's absolutely torn open the sandbags that we had placed around to protect the GoPro cameras. If you look at the mannequin, the damage to it is quite frightening. You can see it's been perforated in numerous locations by fragments, has wounds to both arms and both legs, and the head has been taken off by the shock wave of the blast. If you come around behind the mannequin, you can see that it's actually been perforated completely through. Now, if this was a real person, he would be very seriously wounded at this point. In fact, this detonation has almost perfectly replicated on this mannequin the wounds that were suffered by the soldiers at Vimy in February of 1917. We reset the experiment for a sitting mannequin to try and determine the likely position of the men when they were hit. So this is the results of the second detonation. You can see that because the mannequin was seated, it has lowered his torso, so it has taken much more severe damage because the fragments are at about this level. So he still has leg and lower body wounds, but in this case he has penetrating hits to his torso and to his head, and you can see that the fragments have actually taken both arms off, and the arms are solid wood. So if this had been a soldier sitting here, he would be dead. This leads me to believe that the four men at Vimy were standing when that round impacted, because their wounds were mostly to their lower arms and legs. None of them had any chest wounds, and they had only light fragmentation wounds to their faces, and none of those wounds were fatal instantly. So this is a really graphic demonstration of the terrifying power of artillery on the battlefield. The Great War ground on. Cliff continued to serve at the front with the 44th Battalion. His letters became more infrequent, but he always assured his mother that he was fine. He also sent special letters just for his little sister Evelyn. In early November, Mrs. Bose received official word that Cliff had been killed at Passendale. Later that month, she received his last letter home, written on the 23rd of October. The letter opens, "My dear mother and folks, no doubt you will be wondering why I do not write more frequent, but lately it has been hard to get letters away. However, I am in the best of health and spirits, and I hope these few lines find you all enjoying the same blessing. Well, I suppose by now that they will have conscription going full blast. I certainly do hope that they do not send Elliot, for there have been enough of our family in this mix-up." The letter closes with lines that must have haunted Margaret. "Well, Mother, I am about beat for news. We'll have to close for the present. Hoping these few lines find you enjoying the best of health and happiness, as it leaves me the same. Best wishes. Love to all. I am, ever, your loving son, D.C." Cliff was initially trained as a machine gunner in the 44th Battalion. I've come to the Currahee Military Museum to fire a Vickers machine gun. Machine guns were second only to artillery as the greatest killers in the First World War. I want to see firsthand the firepower of a Great War machine gun. I also want to connect directly with some of Cliff's experience by firing this weapon.
So the way the sights work on this is we have a front sight and a rear sight. Just like the battle rifles, they have a rear aperture battle sight that's graduated for 400 yards. For longer range, for direct fire, it's got a sight where you can tilt it up and then adjust the sight from basically 0 all the way up to 2,000 meters on this particular one.
All right. I mean, now that's one of the important and really terrifying things about these weapons for infantrymen is this thing can shoot 2,000 yards, which is way beyond their ability to fire back really with rifles or even Lewis guns. So
well, correct. And you've got a stable platform where aimed direct fire out to 2,000 meters is a distinct possibility, and you can fire what they call harassing fire at that point. It can fire up to 4,000 meters on indirect targets once everything's set up, and you would do that similar to what artillery would have done.
Really, there's not much they can do to strike back. If you have a machine gun 2 kilometers away that's pouring hundreds of rounds a minute into you, you pretty much just have to try and get through it.
Exactly. Harassing fire was all as demoralizing as direct fire with a lot of the guns because you couldn't do anything about it.
Okay, and then we have the trigger mechanism.
The trigger mechanism is very simple to operate. It's what they call a butterfly, where you can pull the safety back, and then with your thumbs you'd push the triggers forward and fire it that way. If you happen to let go of the safety, as soon as you let go of the gun, it would push the safety back down and you couldn't fire it again.
We lay out watermelons at the height of the head of a soldier lying down in a firing position as targets. The gun that I'm firing was actually manufactured during the Great War, but despite its age, it is still very deadly, attesting to the robust design of the Vickers. We're all set?
We're good.
This is a very nice weapon. It's very accurate, very stable. Now that I'm using the sight system, I can certainly shoot it on target really easily. So you can imagine trying to advance in the face of this.
These guns are normally deployed in pairs. So there'd be another machine gun covering us. So 6 men with this sort of firepower are easily able to hold up a whole battalion of troops. And you can imagine coming back into the face of this kind of firepower. That's an awesome weapon. That is a very good gun. You know, you've got 3 men in a well-protected position with this against guys with bolt-action rifles, and this gun can start hitting them way before they have any chance of firing back. And once I got onto the sights, you know, once I saw where the blade is hitting on this, this is extremely accurate. I mean, you pretty much are hitting, you know, exactly where you traverse it onto. It's an amazingly good machine gun.
It's generally recognised that Vickers took the Maxim gun design, and the Vickers gun was the most refined of all the Maxims.
Right.
They made it lighter, they made it stronger, they made it with better materials. She soldiered on into the 50s and 60s with some armies.
After the deaths of her sons, Mrs. Bose continued to support the war effort and was a very vocal proponent of conscription to ensure that shirkers were made to do their part. She seems to have adopted Cliff's friend George Webb and continued to send him parcels after Cliff was killed. In May of 1918, she was informed that Cliff's grave on the battlefield at Passendale had been lost. That November, the Great War ended, and Margaret embarked upon a quest to find his grave, which lasted well into the 1920s. Margaret traveled to France and Flanders in 1920 and again in 1927, and she took her daughter Evelyn with her at least once. From the postcards she collected, I know that she stayed in Arras to visit Vimy and the graves of Jim and Fred. The scars of the Great War were all still present. She was confronted with the battlefields and graveyards as they were, not the manicured spaces that we know today. I'm at the northernmost end of Vimy Ridge at the 44th Battalion Monument on the Pimple. On the night of the 27th of February 1917, Jim and Fred Bose, Ed O'Neill, and James McTaggart were in the 44th Battalion frontline trenches just a few hundred yards from this position. The 44th Battalion was engaged in trench repairs that night, laying new trench mats in Chalk Street Trench. This could be a dangerous thing to do because it could make noise that would attract enemy attention. And sure enough, just before midnight, the Germans fired either a rifle grenade or a shell, which hit the 4 men. I know that Margaret visited the 44th Battalion Memorial when she was here in 1920. I don't know if she bothered to come back to this area in 1927 because by then, the memorial had already been moved back to Winnipeg. I've often wondered if she ever realized just how close she was to the place where her 2 sons had been mortally wounded. The 44th Battalion Monument was moved to make way for the Vimy Memorial, which was inscribed with the names of the 11,283 Canadians missing in France. Construction had not started even by the time of Margaret's second visit in 1927, but the first stones had been delivered to the site. You can still see the remains of the Canadian trenches on the hillside nearby. The 4 men were carried on stretchers about 2 kilometers through the trenches to the 12th Field Ambulance Advanced Dressing Station at Cabaret Rouge, a jolting process that probably took about an hour. Their dressings would have been adjusted as necessary, and then they would have been moved by ambulance to the main dressing station in Ablain, Saint-Nazaire. I'm at Villers Station Cemetery to visit the grave of Jim Bose. The cemetery is located just beside Chateau de la Haye, where the 44th Battalion rested and trained so much in the spring of 1917. I know that Jim did not survive long enough to receive significant medical care at the main dressing station, because his medical documents have no details about his injuries. This means that he was either declared dead on arrival or shortly thereafter in the wee hours of the 28th of February, 1917. It's very powerful to be here because I know that Cliff attended Jim's funeral and that Margaret was here on both of her visits. Cliff got permission to go back to the main dressing station to see Fred, but just missed him. Fred was moved back to the 6th Casualty Clearing Station with Ed and James. The aim was to stabilize the men at the Casualty Clearing Station before they were evacuated by train to a field hospital. Fred was too dangerously wounded to be moved any further, but Ed O'Neill and James McTaggart were evacuated. Sadly, James McTaggart died of his wounds at No. 1 Canadian General Hospital in Etaples on the 3rd of March. He lies in Etaples Military Cemetery with over 11,000 other soldiers. I also visit Barlin Communal Cemetery to pay my respects to Fred. I do not know if Cliff ever had a chance to visit, but I do know that Margaret was here twice. I reflect that the graves looked very different when she saw them. Fred died of his wounds at 6th Casualty Clearing Station on the 8th of March, 1917. A nurse wrote Margaret and said that he was unconscious most of the time. I hope he did not suffer too much in his last few days. I leave France and move to Ypres in Belgium to visit the Passendale battlefield. From her postcards and letters, I know that Margaret stayed here on her quest to find Cliff's grave, but she could find no trace of him. For several years, she continued to try and locate his grave by writing letters to anyone she felt may be able to help, but it was all to no avail. So she returned in the summer of 1927, most likely for the unveiling of the Men in Gate Memorial, to ensure that Cliff's name was properly inscribed. I'm at the In Flanders Fields Museum in Ypres to learn more about the battle. The Battle of Passendale began on the 31st of July 1917. Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig aimed to clear the Belgian coast of German occupiers, but mainly due to poor planning, his grand offensive failed. The fighting raged until the 10th of November, and the cost to the Allies was 260,000 men killed or wounded. The Germans lost 200,000 men killed and wounded. By the time the Canadians were committed to the fight, the battlefield looked exactly like the image behind me. Knee-deep mud, shell holes filled with water, debris, decomposing human remains, a few scarred tree trunks gauntly pointing up toward the sky, and in the corner, you can see a German pillbox. This was a new tactic for the Canadians. They had not faced it before. These were large concrete shelters that protected the Germans from the heaviest artillery fire and still allowed them to come out and fire on the Canadians as they waded through the mud to try and seize their objectives. I'm visiting Tyne Cot Cemetery, which holds the graves of almost 12,000 soldiers, including about 1,000 Canadians. Over 8,000 of the men are unknown. The memorial also lists 35,000 Commonwealth soldiers missing in the Ypres salient 1914 to 18. These are in addition to those on the Men in Gate in Ypres, as the gate was not large enough for all the names. Bodies found as the battlefields were cleared, along with the men in small cemeteries, were moved here well into the 1930s. This work would still have been ongoing while Margaret was here. Cliff's remains were not identified among the bodies brought in, but it is possible that he is here in an unknown grave. This is the remains of a German concrete bunker. This one was captured by Australian troops in early October, just before they turned this area over to the Canadian Corps. You can see it's made of incredibly thick reinforced concrete. This one's been hit by a heavy projectile
and not penetrated. So 30 or 40 German soldiers would have been able to shelter inside this concrete emplacement. And once the Allied bombardment passed over them, they would run out on either side and deploy their machine guns into the shell holes around the area to fire at the attacking Canadians. These were always sited on high ground to give them a good field of fire, so our troops could always see this little square outline in the distance, and that's where these things got the nickname pillboxes from. And there were Germans deploying from structures just like this, facing Cliff in his final battle.
I want to visit the site of Cliff's last battle. I follow the old sunken railway line, now a peaceful walking path. It will lead me to a point called Defy Crossing in 1917, where the 44th Battalion waited all day on the 27th of October. The men laid in these fields, heavily shelled, and as the battalion history notes, drenched with gas. Many of the men took off their masks and faced the poison, rather than enduring the suffocating feeling of wearing their gas masks for hours on end. At 10 p.m. on the 27th of October, Cliff and the rest of the men in A Company stood up and began to advance on the German positions in decline copse, about 600 yards away. They were hit with very heavy machine gun fire because the supporting artillery barrage was not on target. In spite of this, they crossed the ground and entered the copse.
I'm in the remains of decline copse. After crossing that machine gun swept ground on the night of the 27th, the 44th Battalion forced their way in here and they cleared out all the German positions using Lewis guns, rifles, grenades, and bayonets. It was a tough fight that lasted for about 4 hours. Once they had the Germans out, they settled in to defend the copse.
Cliff survives this fierce fighting. On the morning of the 28th, 2 remaining German positions were discovered in the copse. A Company quickly attacked and destroyed them. The remainder of the day was quiet, except for heavy German shelling.
At about 8:15 in the evening, the German counterattack came. Pretty much right where I'm standing, somewhere between 50 and 100 Germans, covered by heavy artillery fire, broke into the Canadian positions. This initially drove A Company back. However, the 44th Battalion counterattacked, and after several hours more hard fighting, once again secured decline copse. This was to be the last German counterattack, and from this point forward in the battle, the copse was held by Canada. Somewhere in the fighting on the 28th of October, Cliff Bose was hit by a German artillery shell and killed instantly. The 44th Battalion was relieved at 3 a.m. on the 29th of October. Their 4 days in the salient had cost them 160 men killed and wounded and 300 others lightly injured by gas. The battalion picked up as many of its dead as it could, including Cliff, and marched out to Zonnebeek.
I am 3/4 of a mile southwest of Zonnebeek. The chaplain of the 44th Battalion wrote to Margaret in 1920 and told her that this was the area of the 44th Battalion Cemetery in October of 1917. Cliff's body was carried here from decline copse and buried. The area was retaken by the Germans in 1918 and then again by the Allies. In that fighting, Cliff's grave was destroyed. The small cemeteries in the area of Zonnebeek were moved to Tyne-Cott Cemetery in the 1920s, but Cliff's remains were never found. I wonder how many hours Margaret spent in this area, poring over the ground for any trace of her son. I want to leave a poppy here, just in case Cliff's remains are still in this field. It is terrible to think of how miserable Cliff's last days were. It feels so unfinished and unsettling to know that he is still missing. I'm at the Menin Gate in Ypres. The gate was designed in 1921 and officially unveiled in 1927. It holds the names of some 54,000 Commonwealth soldiers who are missing in action in the Ypres salient, including 6,983 Canadians. I'm here to see Cliff's name. I know that Margaret would have stood right here at the unveiling in 1927. So this is as close as I'm ever going to come to standing in her footsteps. To pay their respects to the fallen, the people of Ypres have buglers from the local fire brigade stop traffic and play the last post at the gate every evening at 8 p.m. The original silver bugles were donated by a Canadian artillery officer. The ceremony was performed at the official opening and has been a daily event since the 2nd of July, 1928. The ceremony was interrupted by the German occupation during World War II, although the service itself was continued at a cemetery in England. At 8 p.m. on the 6th of September, 1944, while Polish troops were still fighting in other parts of the city to eject the Germans, the fire brigade returned and played Last Post. They have not missed a day since. As my time in Belgium draws to a close, I visit the Canadian Passendale Memorial at Crest Farm, once the site of a German pillbox, and one of the machine gun locations that fired on Cliff in his last battle. Decline Copse is now barely visible through the trees. In 1920, Margaret believed that Cliff was killed here, so although the Canadian Memorial was not unveiled until 1924, I am sure she visited this site. The battlefield would still have been such desolation when she was here in 1920. It must have been terrible for her to see it, and for her to know that her son was lost forever, somewhere in the morass. I honestly cannot imagine a more perfect hell. In 1919, the families of the fallen began being issued with a memorial plaque and a scroll on behalf of the king. These became known as Dead Man's Pennies. Over 1.3 million were issued across the Commonwealth. Beginning in 1920, Canadian wives and mothers of individuals killed in the Great War were also issued with a memorial cross for each fallen family member. I'm in Winnipeg at the 44th Battalion Monument to meet with Marilyn and update her on the results of my research.
In essence, this is a replica of the 44th Battalion Memorial.
But authentic parts of it.
Right, and the main thing was, originally these were stone tablets, and these had the names of the men who were killed in the fighting around Vimy. So this was actually put up on the feature called the Pimple, which is at the end of Vimy Ridge, and the 44th Battalion captured this on the 12th of April, 1917. And this was put up in July 1917 on the Pimple. And so Cliff is not on it because he was not killed until October. And so only the names of the men who fell up to the end of June are here. But one of the things that I like about the monument, I mean, is that Cliff likely saw it. You know, like, because the battalion,
that's
dedicated
just
it.
Unbelievable to think that he actually looked at this.
Right. And then, of course, your grandmother, when she went in 1920, this was standing on the Pimple, so she would have seen it. And then it was moved back to Winnipeg in 1926, so she would have seen it here. But of course, there was nothing there when she went back in 1927. I'm not sure that she ever knew how close this was to where Jim and Fred were mortally wounded. I'm not really sure if she ever knew that.
Yards,
yeah,
right?
it's about 300 yards away. So amazing, though, that it really connects Manitoba to Vimy Ridge, and it's amazingly fitting that this was brought home to this park here in Winnipeg.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, the other thing that I've determined in the research is about the watch you have.
Yes.
So what I know for sure is that the watch was Jim's originally, and he must have had, you know, some sort of a premonition that he was going to die, which is actually fairly common amongst soldiers. So he gave the watch to Cliff for safekeeping. So Cliff did keep it, and then Jim was in fact killed. And the night before Cliff goes into his last battle at Passendale, he gave the watch to a friend of his.
My goodness, yeah.
And then he was killed, and then the friend sent the watch home to your grandmother. So amazing.
Amazing.
To think that,
yes.
you know, they both are involved in that. But it's a fantastic memorial.
It's amazing. It's totally amazing. I'm just very moved, and such a beautiful day, a beautiful park. But to think that it just has so much more value than I, you know, felt it had before. I mean, I knew it was very interesting. Of course, I valued it, but I'm just saying it's so much more. The meaning is so much greater now.
Yeah, it is a place where you can really feel pretty strongly connected to them. You know?
Yes.
On Decoration Day in June of 1926, the 44th Battalion, now long disbanded, mounted its last 100-man guard for the unveiling ceremony. 100 former soldiers had rejoined the militia so that they could have uniforms and equipment, and they had completed 3 months of drill practice under the guidance of their former regimental sergeant major. A huge crowd gathered as the 44th dedicated this final effort to their fallen, or, as it was said in the battalion history, their advanced guard into the final no man's land. When the moment came, the Master of Ceremonies announced that the monument would be unveiled by the mother who had lost the most sons in the 44th Battalion. Wearing her 3 silver crosses, Mrs. Margaret Bose stepped forward and performed the honors. I've come back to the Boissevain and Morton Cemetery to pay my respects to Joe, Margaret, and their children who are buried here with them.
History tells us that the Great War ended on the 11th of November, 1918. But I've come to realize that for the families of the fallen, that's not true at all. I'm sure that time did dull the pain for Margaret, but I wonder how many times she dreamt about her boys, reread their letters, and thought about them and laughed or cried. It is a sacrifice so immense that it absolutely demands our utmost gratitude. And yet, it seems that that gratitude is wholly inadequate. I hope that they all truly do rest in peace.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of auld lang syne? For auld lang syne, my dear, for auld lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for